All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining. I know we still have folks hopping in from the waiting room, but we're going to go ahead and get started because I know there's some questions y'all are hoping we get to, and also questions you probably brought with you. So thank you in advance to our panelists for being here. I'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. We'd asked throughout today, we have some questions already that folks submitted, some questions our panelists wanted to cover. So if you can stay muted during that part. We will save room at the end today if you have questions to both either unmute or put those in the chat. So we'll make sure we save space for that towards the end of our time together today. But without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump on in and have our panelists introduce themselves a little bit. Carlyn, you want to kick us off by telling us just a little bit who you are and your relation to kind of boards and board recruitment?
Yeah, happy to. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me, to the catalog team, and also for our participants, joining in. Really appreciate you all taking some time to think about your boards today. I'm the CEO of a company called Good Insight, which is an executive search firm and governance consultancy. And we work with small nonprofits, funders, associations to help strengthen their leadership across their executive team as well as their board. I've sat on a number of boards myself, and I'm currently on the board of Leadership Greater Washington. So I'll hand it over to one of my panel colleagues here.
Hi, Carlyn. I'll go next. I will reiterate thank you to the catalog for having us here today. Looking forward to this discussion. My name is Serena Gabarezuna, and I'm an energy attorney and a partner at the law firm of White & Case LLP, where I help to lead our energy markets and regulatory practice. However, I'm joining you today in my capacity as president of the board of directors for Calvary Women's Services. And for anyone who may not be familiar, Calvary is a DC nonprofit that provides housing, health, education, and employment programs that empower women to overcome their homelessness and regain their independence. This is actually my third term as president of Calvary's board, but I've been a volunteer and a supporter for many years, and I served on the board in various other capacities since spring of 2018. I also serve on a number of other nonprofit boards, ranging from those that are active in the energy, DEI, and educational spaces. So I'll draw from my combined experiences today as appropriate, but honored to be representing Calvary as a member of the catalog here today.
Great, thank you. And I also want to welcome how delighted I am to be here and looking forward to our conversation. My name is Darren Vance. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm executive director of a small but mighty nonprofit called Rainbow Families. We've been around for 34 years in the DC metropolitan area, and we provide support services, education classes, opportunities to share and learn from one another, as well as advocacy and empowerment for LGBTQ plus families and prospective parents.
Great. Thank you all for being here. And again, excited for the conversation. So we're going to talk largely about board recruitment today, but just want to start when you think about boards you're on, boards you're working with, your board in general right now. What's kind of one, let's start on the positive side. What's one big opportunity or something that's going well, you think, with boards right now or with your board? What stands out to you when you think about that?
Well, I'm happy to jump in and start, and this will tie a bit to one of the challenges, but over the past 3 years that I've had the opportunity to serve as president of the board, we've been operating in COVID times, which is a challenge, and we'll get to that later, but it's provided an excellent opportunity for our staff to step up in extraordinary ways. We historically relied very heavily on on-site volunteers, and with a global health pandemic and working with an organization that has congregate living facilities, that definitely impacted our ability to have on-site volunteers. Despite that, our doors remained open 24/7, 365. And so through that, we saw our staff stepping up. We used this as an opportunity to actually build out our middle management and provide more leadership opportunities for staff. And this also has allowed for and really necessitated increased board engagement. So we were able to really have our board members become more active. We've always been a working board, but that was even more so given the crises that we were facing. And we were able to bring more supporters into the Calvary community. And that involved really thinking creatively about ways to fundraise, about ways to engage volunteers, about ways to communicate the impact that Calvary is having during these challenging times, particularly when we couldn't have our traditional in-person events where our volunteers and supporters could see in person the great work that Calvary is doing and the impact that we have.
And I'm happy to jump in as well. And Serena, some of mine relates to what you've said about thriving and really showing up for the work because of the pandemic. Having been a board member for other nonprofits and now ED of this nonprofit, I've always heard of and have occasionally seen that sweet spot that's often referred to on a board when it just kind of fits. And we'll talk about this, when we talk about some of our challenges, but we seem to have fallen into a sweet spot where we have a better understanding of our roles, who does what, we know who is really routinely going to do the work. We know who the kind of the working board people are, the visionary board people are, and each person's unique strength and talent. And that took about 4 years to get us to that point. So we'll chat more about that. But when you're able to make that happen, it's pretty incredible.
It's lovely to hear you all think about your own experiences on the board. One of the things that we've seen with our clients and colleagues in the space is this opportunity that everybody is taking to reevaluate how they're spending their time, how they're living their life. What is the alignment of their job and the communities that they're living in, and what is it that they value? And you're hearing about the great resignation or the great reshuffling or whatever the thing might be. But we've seen a lot of organizations and a lot of people step up and be interested in engaging with their community. So particularly thinking about community-based nonprofits, people are very eager to figure out how to get more involved. How do they donate to causes that they care about? How are they engaging in their local community? So we're seeing that both on the executive search side of the work, but also in some of our board recruiting projects where people are trying to figure out how are they living into the values that they have. So I think it's a real opportunity for board recruitment too.
Definitely. Yeah. It seems like a common theme there of engagement, right? Boards stepping up, folks wanting to step up into boards. So a timely conversation on recruitment today. We know also when we're thinking about recruitment, it's not just leveraging those opportunities, it's also probably addressing some challenges we have on our board too right now. What are some of those that you're seeing, either across some of the boards or any one of your boards in particular that kind of stand out to you as a challenge right now?
If it's all right, I'll kind of follow through with what I alluded to. And I thought I'd muted my phone, I'm sorry. When I joined this organization 4 years ago, we had gone through some real significant changes right before my arrival, board level, staff level, some disharmony, which is the most beautiful way I can phrase it. And, while, especially as we were really small, the board did everything. Total working board. So that means membership planning, events, teaching classes. As we grew, even with part-time staff, it just wasn't sustainable. And there was tremendous burnout. And that's a huge concern for every nonprofit organization. Of course, a lot of board members rolled off. And so a decision was made to bring a full-time ED on to supplement the part-time staff that we'd had. So that was interesting enough and risky for a small organization to take that leap. But the biggest challenge was navigating that transition from being a fully working board, like what color of the Dixie Cups working board, to having the trust in an ED to hand over the reins of the organization and then become a governing and fundraising board. And at the time, that was not where these wonderful board members were at. in their head. They were struggling with letting go of the organization as they knew it. So that, I think, has been the biggest challenge. And I'll mention it when we get to recruitment, but part of it is that we stopped, we really recognized our value and our services to the community, and we stopped doubting ourselves and really talking about ourselves as other people saw us. And that really helped us with board recruitment and with seeking really great talent. And we have the best board we've had in over 4 or 5 years.
That's amazing, Darren. One of the things you mentioned, burnout, is part of what we faced. As I alluded to in my opening, Calvary couldn't and didn't close its doors. So we remained open throughout the entire pandemic. And as you could imagine, a global pandemic, and then we can't forget the associated social and racial justice challenges that were coinciding at that same time. And the economic impacts of both of those really had a disproportionate effect on the women that Calvary serves. And so whether due to the impact of increased occurrences of domestic violence or the comorbidities that our clients have and that were exacerbated by the pandemic and by the economic stressors they were facing, or just like the impact of a deadly, highly contagious virus, we were really at the forefront of navigating those multidimensional challenges. And so particularly during the beginning and the height of the crisis, that required a lot more investment and a much larger time commitment of our board members than we historically had. Our board as a whole meets every other month. There was one point at the beginning of the pandemic where we were meeting once a week, and not everyone was there every week, but probably half or more was there every week. And so we really just ramped up 1,000% what our board members were doing, and they were there. They came through. They wanted to be there. But for a period of time, it was really a lot, and that's while our board members were combating, burnout in their own professional careers, accommodating their individual trauma and challenges that they were facing, and us as leaders, including the staff, being nimble and reactive, whether that was refocusing time, reallocating time. And one other thing that we had to do was, be responsive. So I'll give you an example. DEI had always been on our minds as something that we were really focusing on. After the murder of George Floyd and everything else that ensued, DEI really rose to the top. And so strategically, that involved reassessing, the timeline in which we would address certain issues. And so we've been able to really kick off and accelerate a DEI consultant and action plan process. And, that's something that we would have done and something that's always been at the forefront of what we're thinking, but being responsive and reactionary to what was happening in real time was something that definitely was somewhat of a challenge, but also I think turned itself into an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Just picking up on that note, one of the things that I've been seeing, and hopefully you all are seeing it too, is the board members and the team that helps recruit board members, whether that be staff, executive director, it's different for every organization, is much more explicit about looking for people connected to social justice, right? We're moving beyond just this conversation of racial representation on boards to a more race equity, race justice standpoint, and then thinking about how do nonprofits recruit, very explicitly, right? Saying we are recruiting board members who understand the implications of structural racism on our subject area, and that's what we're trying to recruit. We're not just trying to dance and tiptoe and say oh, it's about diversity, but it's about racial justice. So I think it's giving some common language about what the organization's intersection to structural racism might be, and all of these things. The other thing that I've seen people challenged with, or sort of opportunities for, is role clarity. And it sounds like, Darren, that's part of the thing that you're talking about too, right? Getting clear on what are the roles and changing roles of a board of directors. And so I think as clear as it's different for every organization. Every board is so different, but thinking about what role clarity looks like, and then not letting that nonprofit scarcity mindset pop up to say like, oh gosh, do you want to join my board? It's basically no time. Like, you don't really have to do much. Like, don't worry, we're just glad to have you. But then, but that's not true, right? Because then you all come and you're like, people aren't engaging. They're not giving the money that they, we're like creating our own like mental models around this because of work that we're trying to like say, oh, we just want to have you, don't worry about it. So I am seeing people be much more explicit about like what's board service to our organization, and then be able to build common language around with their board who's helping recruit, thinking about what networks, and being really clear about like, what does it mean? And it's a privilege to serve on our board. And like, it's exciting to contribute to this mission. So changing the narrative around that. And I hope that you all are thinking about that and seeing that yourselves.
And if it's all right, Matt, Carlyn, I would love to, you saw my head bouncing up and down, and Serena's as well, around this whole thing. And as I mentioned, not selling your organization short, but when I came on board and I looked at the board, it was more like if you feel like it, we'd really love it if you'd consider doing these things, but we don't want to push you. And, we had just come out of some strife and turmoil, and it was as if we were just grateful to have people there. And thankfully, we're not in that place. And our documentation is night and day different from what it was 4 years ago. And the other thing is that in the selection process, one of the things that I noticed was, and I hope this helps anyone, when we were especially coming out of that walking on eggshells kind of change and all of that, when we were recruiting board members, the single thing that I heard in board meetings to vote for or against having somebody join was when the board member who was interviewing them and all that said, I really like them. I think they'd be so nice. And that just made, my head spin to some degree. And so we created then a matrix of their skills, their interests, their lived experiences, so that there can be a score attached, which seems like a no-brainer, but in other conversations with other EDs, I've heard that that's not always done. So I would definitely encourage people to remove a significant amount of that subjective evaluation process and add more critical, more criteria to help make those decisions. And yeah, we were, oh, that person's nice, and oh, they don't show up for half of our board meetings, but that's okay. They're a good person. Yeah.
I have to jump in, and Matt, we're hijacking your agenda here, but that intentionality is something that's really critical, and is something that we've really been focusing on. It's no longer just is this person nice? Do we want to hang out with them? It's being explicit and upfront with them when they're interviewing. What do you think your strengths are? What skills do you want to bring? How do you think that you could utilize them within this organization, within this board? This is how we see you fitting into the fabric of our board. These are the skill sets of individuals who will be rolling off. These are the pieces we're missing. This is what we need to implement our strategic plan over the next 2 years, and being very upfront, being very honest and assessing amongst ourselves as a board where we have gaps and what we need, and then communicating that to candidates and making sure that they are willing and able to step up and to step into those roles. And then that helps with onboarding and integration, which we'll get to later, which is then they've come in and from day one, this is the role I can play. This is the value I add. You brought me in to do X, Y, and Z, and now I'm going to dive in and roll up my sleeves and be, feel fully integrated and involved from minute one, because I know why I'm here. I know what it is that I am bringing and the impact that I can have on the board and the organization.
Well, and we'll hop back to kind of pure recruitment here in a second, but maybe kind of staying on this thread around selection, right? Which is really what we're talking about here around, what are folks sharing with us? What are we sharing with them during this? And how are we actually making a strategic choice? to all y'all's points, but I think, Carlyn, you're calling out directly to the power dynamics at play here, right? Because often how this tradition has worked, right, is that we are out there, scarcity mindset, begging for board members, taking whoever says yes, right, and then shocked when they don't feel kind of a level of responsibility, right, to fulfill some expectations, and when there's a misalignment there of power between board and staff, right, moving forward. So maybe y'all can just talk about what have you seen work or help, or maybe if you made some shifts to your selection process, what does that selection process look like for you now, and what seemed to have helped during that?
Well, I'll start. Our selection process, it really begins by doing a self-evaluation and looking at, what skill sets do we currently have on the board? What goals, projects, growth do we anticipate over the next fiscal year? And what is it that we need to be able to accomplish that? And so it's, not just kind of like looking for nice, like, good people, but these are skills that we need, and this is what we'll need to set out to accomplish what the organization is setting out to accomplish. And so we're very intentional and try to be very strategic in that. And then from there, it's an analysis of when you're going to out to recruit, where are people that what are the networks, who are the people, where do they exist, where we can find these skills that would be additive to our board. And so I think it really works well when you start with that internal analysis, and you have goals that you can share with the board, so that when we're saying to board members, please help us with recruitment, share referrals, give us ideas of people who might be a good fit, they know what it actually is that we need and that we want and that we're looking for, and not just, well, this is my best friend, so I'd love to be able to have another reason to hang out with them, once a month.
Yes, I will definitely agree to that. The other thing is really with matrices and with the discussions that you're having, it is super when someone checks a box that says fundraising. And so you just assume, that great, they've got fundraising experience, but it really requires, and this was something we really had to learn, it requires drilling down and saying, what type of fundraising? Is it helping your child sell Girl Scout cookies on up to fundraising for larger, nonprofit or private organizations? All are super valid, but it's just important to know that, so that, again, you're not disappointed when the reality doesn't match what you had expected. And I just think that having that really honest dialogue is so important. And again, as I said, to kind of take that personal element away from it, to really think about what will benefit the needs of the organization right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things, and Matt, if it's helpful, I can share like a draft board matrix when you all send an email out. I'm happy to do that. It's a resource we've adapted from Board Source, so it might be familiar to some folks. To make clear that fundraising is multiple things, and it's both money that somebody has available to give, its ability to network in certain circles that otherwise might have money to give. It might be different types of resources. Like one of the things for the Leadership Greater Washington board that I sit on, they have a give-get. One of the ways I fulfill that give-get is my company sponsors a leadership series that they do, right? So like I do have to give personal money, but I can also use my company to help sponsor something for the organization. So, when we're thinking about, I'm definitely not the wealthiest person on that board by any means, but I have resources I can navigate. The other resource that I think is often under examined is like, what kind of time does this person have to give to the organization, and what kind of leadership experience or willingness to step into leadership experience do they have? So thinking of time as an additional resource, and being clear in your matrix, if you have 20 super high power busy people that are never going to be able to make bi-monthly meetings, or really don't want to step up to chair your audit committee or your development committee or all of these sorts of things. Like, how are you replenishing the leadership potential of your board and making it easier to serve, but also like actually recruiting people that have the time necessary to give to fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities. So I think that there's an element of resource development even beyond cash resources too.
Definitely.
It's also, Matt, if I may, sorry, I'm just going to continue rolling on this. The other piece is like our fundraising, right? Like some people are going to be like, I don't want to fundraise. That's not why I joined the board, because I love the mission, what have you. So like, could you break down the key responsibilities related to fundraising, right? Does this person tell a good story? Is this person deeply connected to the mission of the organization? Does this person love to throw dinner parties at their home that they like you could invite different donors? And what's that sort of breaking down the actual functions of fundraising to lower the fear that people have around asking people for money, I think is really a helpful way to engage people in their ability. And so as you're thinking about that board matrix, that also might be something to think about: storytelling, relationships, blah, blah, blah.
Definitely. And something we recommend to folks too is just to have a job description for this board role, right? Just like we would for, this is an important leadership role at the organization. So just like we would for, a staff person, have a clear job description of expectations, and include that. I think Carlyn had a point about time, really important. That if we really want them to spend 5 hours a month, like, don't hide the ball there, right? Like, let them know, because otherwise, just getting someone on who isn't going to be able to do that is just setting us up for those difficult missed expectations later.
I agree with that, and setting those expectations and then making it easy for them. So at the beginning of our fiscal year, we set out every board meeting and every executive committee meeting date within the first few weeks. So folks mark their calendars because you're expected to be there. So, in the first week of October, now through the end of next September, the specific days that we will want you to be there, we make a goal to have materials circulated beforehand so you can review them, to make it easier for people to fulfill their duties and their obligations. So we also share a list of, our set big fundraising or community engagement volunteer events so that people have an idea of what the expectation is for, how often will you, log on to Zoom in the past few years for an event, or, come down to our site for an in-person event when we can do that, or, our big Hope Awards dinner, which is our largest fundraiser. That's something that we talk about even in the recruitment process, so people understand what that is and what the crux of our signature and key events are.
Definitely. Someone asked, just kind of tangibly for your selection process, what's like the kind of order of operations? Like, do they meet with the ED? Do they meet with a couple of governance folks? Do they submit materials? Just how kind of practically do you go from someone says I'm interested, or you're asking when they say they're interested, to now they're like up for a vote? What happened in between those two things?
Sure, and I'll jump in on that. We will be using the catalogs program to help us moving forward. But historically, when we have cast to the net, then those people who express interest send their information to me, and I keep all of that information in a file shared and accessible to the entire board. But basically, they've empowered me to kind of filter out and more importantly, lift up people that seem like they could be a really incredible fit. So we do that. I present those names to the board, all the names, none of them are removed, but with my recommendations. And then they are assigned to the board members, so that each board member might take 2 people, 3 people, 1 person, however many people have inquired. And then there's a series of conversations with their their sponsored board member, the person who interviews them. If they go to the next level, then a separate board member has a discussion with them. And we don't call them interviews. We just call them like getting to know you discussions, because that's really what we are. And what this purpose is at this point. During that process, we are sure to share the job description, which is more bullet pointed. And then I know we'll probably talk about it later, but then we invest in a pretty robust onboarding program, which is so vital. But anyway, as far as the process goes, they're voted in to be approved, and then the board president or vice president will personally reach out to that person and say, we voted, we're so excited. Here are some things that you need to think about and focus on for the next 4 weeks. Like, instead of telling them your next year is going to look like this and we're going to flood your inbox, in your calendar and all that, so we say, here's what you're going to need to know for the next 4 weeks: your onboarding, key contacts, making sure that you're a registered member of our organization, so you're getting our updates and newsletters and events, and we invite you to attend any programs and events as our guest before your term officially begins. So for us, we try to keep it a very friendly, a casual, friendly environment. These people are donating their time after all, and then we really try to make them feel a part of the family even before their official board term begins, and that seems to have worked quite well.
Darren, I would say a couple of themes you mentioned definitely shine through in our process as well. And one is, keeping things conversational, really trying to get to know the individual and let them get to know the organization. So we begin with the submission of a bio or some written description, general information, whatever form the candidate wants to share with us. A lot of our board members may be professionals like myself. So I think I remember submitting like a copy of my firm bio, as well as like some supplemental information about things that wouldn't have been there, a picture, just a kind of get to know you one pager. Our candidates all have a conversation with our executive director, and that conversation includes a tour of our residential facility. So they're actually able to see where the staff work, where our clients live and operate. They're able to really be on the ground and see what a day-to-day is like at Calvary. There are also follow-up conversations with the chair of our governance committee, who in conjunction with the ED runs the interview and recruitment process. In addition to meeting with the ED and the governance committee chair, we also have our candidates meet with another member of the governance committee, and or someone who they either know or was a referral, or who was their connection to the organization. So each person gets to meet with at least 3 members of the board, and sometimes more, and we make ourselves available to other members if that would be helpful. And so, for example, if someone, has accounting skills and we're thinking at some point they might be great for a treasurer's role, or they've expressed that, we'd have them meet with our current treasurer. If someone is coming in with particular HR skills and may be a part of a particular committee because of that, we have them meet with someone who actually has that skill set now to get that deeper understanding of what their role might look like as they slot in, if there are specific skill sets that they're bringing. From there, the full governance committee receives those written materials. They get feedback and debrief from the individuals who met with the candidate, and the governance committee will then vote whether to include the candidate in a slate that would then go for full board vote, consideration and vote, or to place them on hold, perhaps because they're not a great fit right now, because they've come back and said, after talking with you, I realize I don't really have the time to commit in the way that I want to, but I want you to consider me in the future. So there may be a vote to hold them for a next cycle. And for those who are voted to move forward on the slate to the full board then receives that packet. There's a report out from the governance committee, and then there's a full board vote. A couple things that I want to highlight: we have multiple people meet with the candidates. We also have some set questions that everyone gets asked. And here, that's really to try to make sure that there isn't any implicit bias or any type of inequity in the process. So really thinking through, how do we make the most fair and equitable process, and also ensure that we have some kind of metrics and points so we can compare across candidates, so that we're fairly evaluating, while also taking into account the individual skill sets that they may be bringing, or anything unique. Perhaps they have a relationship that we really would like to maintain, or that we've been seeking to be able to establish. But that's generally how we go about it. And I will say that throughout the pandemic and doing this remotely, a number of the boards I worked on have been kind of rethinking and reevaluating how we do this. And not Calvary, but another board I sit on has really been more intentional about the DEI aspect of recruitment. And so, thinking through, is there any bias in our process? How are we being intentional about, making sure that we are living our DEI action plan through our recruitment? Are there any tweaks we need to make? How do we make sure that the goals that we've set out are actually being implemented, and that there aren't opportunities for inadvertent failures or lapses throughout that process, particularly when a lot of this is happening virtually and over Zoom like this, and not in in-person settings.
I don't have anything to add in terms of, process that you have laid out, like wonderful processes. I would just offer, one of the things is making sure that it's rigorous enough to appropriately evaluate who you want to join your board, but not so rigorous that when you decline people to join your board, then they've been through the absolute ringer and had, all of the things, the background check, the whole nine, and then they're surprised, like, why did you make me go through all of that? And then you've decided not to. This also relates to the scarcity mindset thing that I said earlier of, like, it's okay to decline somebody to join your board, because if you don't have the right people on the bus, in the right seats, whatever the Jim Collins thing is that people talk about, I think it's Jim Collins, that's a problem too, right? Having not great board members, or people that are going to create an environment or not hold your values sincerely, or not do the work that, like, that's not great either. So think about, if there are people new to the organization, what are the pipelines of opportunity that you can work with them? Could they join a committee? Could they fulfill some fundraising opportunities? Are there volunteer activities that they could be involved in, so that you can continue to build the relationship? If it's a no for now, but, like, would love to see this person again, that there are opportunities. And then if it's just like, it's not a good fit, then you should not feel obligated to have that person join, even though you've invested some time.
I think it's a great reminder that you can say no, and also you should encourage them that if they feel like they need to say no, or not now, right? So we also, I think, see sometimes board members join because they feel guilty about stopping the process, right? After talking to some folks and making sure they know, look, that's fine. We'd rather have you 2 years from now, you can really do it, than right now and not. So that's great. Getting back to kind of just where these people come from for your selection process, right? How do you find people to interview and submit resumes and talk to in the first place? A lot of what you all were sharing kind of early on relating to some of those opportunities and challenges were around diversifying your board in a variety of ways, right? Skill set, racial representation, folks that actually have kind of an equity and DEI background, right? Or interest or knowledge. And a lot of times that's going to encourage us to go outside of our networks, right? Traditional board recruitment is very much, who do I already know, right? Who am I friends with? And sometimes that can be helpful, but obviously increasingly we want to go outside of just who do I have 1 degree of contact with. So any advice for folks that are beginning to do it for maybe the first time, trying to recruit folks that are outside of their kind of personal network, or outside of the board's personal network?
I would love to chime in first.
Yeah.
So as a white cisgender male, clearly, it's incumbent on me to know what I don't know, and to learn what I need to learn, and continually do that. At my initial thought to this topic, Matt, was, it's you have relationships with people, and if your ED or your board members don't have relationships with people who are marginalized, or who don't look like them, or who represent different lived experiences, that's a huge problem. Like I think that it comes first from within. You can put all the LinkedIn things you want out there, and for good or bad, it's now become standard language in these searches. What is required is a bit of sincerity and genuine effort, and that's from relationships. After all, I really think that the best people are people who you're connected with, if not directly or through one other person. And then secondly, the big learning curve, as I mentioned, big learning curve for myself was to learn from others who do not share my lived experiences. One of those things was to double down on what this means. And what I mean by that is, we don't beat around the bush. We say, look, we will give priority to applicants who represent X, Y, Z, and so on. We don't skirt around the issue. We make it abundantly clear. And the result from that has been very positive. And it can be hard for people to take that leap and just be very, very upfront and forthright versus putting catchphrases on a job description. So as the ED of a small nonprofit, that's what I feel has worked well for us.
I would add to that, when the first time I did some really heavy recruiting for our board, we were having a fairly large class that was going to be rolling off, and we really needed to fill some gaps. I first paused to reflect and re-internalize the organization's mission. And then I gave myself time to think creatively about what opportunities and where I might have opportunities to interact with people who had those shared ideals and believed in that mission. And I'll give you an example. Over 98% of the women that Calvary serves are women of color, and particularly African-American women. I am an African-American woman, so that's easy enough. But understanding our client demographics, when I was trying to think about where to recruit, I immediately thought to explore this community of women of color attorneys. I don't know many of the people in that group. It's a group that I had just recently joined myself, but I thought to myself, there's this group of, hundreds of women of color attorneys who I know from our other events share, my ideals and my passion. And so I use that as a gateway to introduce the organization to them, for folks to reach out and let me know if they had an interest and if the organization sparked them. And that was, and that's been a really fertile breeding ground, actually, for our board. And I have several folks now who I did not know before, who I'd maybe seen in passing at an event, who are some of my closest friends and who are very dedicated and passionate board members. Beyond that, I think that, thinking creatively about the circles that you have. I think we often think about, okay, like, well, who's my neighbor, who's my friend, who do I work with? Coworkers are great, folks that you have met through community are great, but some other areas are alumni associations. I'm very active with my law school alumni, with the University Alumni Association, where I went to law school. And so thinking about recruiting through there, individuals that you've worked with on other boards. I've sat on a number of boards over time. So if someone has dedicated and been a great board member in one instance, maybe they would be great for another board if they've rolled off, or they now have more time, or they're reanalyzing where they want to commit their time and energy. And then also using your board alumni and their networks. And I think we might talk about this a little later on, but once you have folks roll off of a board, hopefully that's not the end of the relationship, unless it was just a really bad one, in which case, maybe all's well to go your separate ways. But assuming that you had a positive experience, tapping into that network as a way to recruit is another kind of creative way to get at those pools of people who will have that shared mission, but might not be directly in your 1 degree of connection.
Yeah, once you have the list of where the gaps are, it makes it really easy to then say, we are looking for people that bring these different experiences. And then really just start telling everybody, often we get wrapped up with the idea of oh, I'm looking at this list, I don't know anybody. But that doesn't mean that the people don't know people, right? How do you get a couple degrees of Kevin Bacon away from this list? And so one of the things that I'm doing with a client right now is we did a list of who are connectors between our two networks, right? And so these are funders, these are friends that are just real connectors. They're donors to other organizations, looking at like, who are the donors that like is the local organization donate to like Phil Mendelson, who's our city council chair, all of these sorts of things. So looking at some lists, pulling the donor lists, they had done a wealth scan recently. Who are people that would be willing to have a conversation about this organization, not to join the board, but to do some brainstorming around who are people in their networks that would share passion about the organization. And if this donor is like, actually, I would love to join your board, I think this client would be very interested in having that conversation too, but not going into the conversation with the intent of just starting to invite people, but saying, we're really looking to diversify our board. We are serving majority Black women here in DC, and therefore we would like a board that is majority Black women. These are the different professional experiences, expertise, resources necessary, but like just naming what the priorities are and going into conversations like that. So I think that is helpful if you start looking at your own resources and tapping into your networks, not just who do you know to join, but who do you know who might know someone.
I think asking folks to share influence there, right? It's so important, something we increasingly do in the space. So that's great. I also want to highlight, Serena, to your point, I think professional associations that exist, right? Even if you're not part of the association, reaching out, a lot of them, especially right now, can't do some of the typical community engagement things they do, right? They're not doing group volunteer days and stuff. So they're looking for things to send to partners. So if you're looking for a marketer, you better believe there's a lot of marketing associations in DC, right? Things like that exist. So reaching out to those folks that might have that kind of set of skills. It's great. The other question around kind of finding folks is obviously when we think of the pipeline, right? So hopefully we're always kind of developing folks that we think down the line might be a good board member. A lot of those kind of typical ways we get people into that pipeline might have been paused during the pandemic, right? We're not meeting people casually at events or conferences or our own events we're hosting. Any advice for folks of just how to bring some people in, since it might have been a couple of years now since they've had some of those chance encounters that they used to use to bring folks in? Anything you're doing to kind of add to your pipeline for your board?
So I'll say volunteer opportunities is one, which is challenging for in-person volunteering, which hasn't really been happening, but that is definitely one way to find people. And I think making sure that your board members have their board elevator pitch. They can succinctly explain, this is what the organization does. This is what the board does. This is why I love being on it. This is what it means to me. Being able to share that and having it be top of mind and sharing it when you do have opportunities to interact, I think can be very helpful. Another avenue that, not Calvary, but another board that I sit on, we use is a committee engagement. So we have certain committees that only board members can serve on, but there are other committees that non-board members can serve on. And that is a really fertile pipeline breeding ground. So if we meet someone, they're interested, but maybe it's not the right time, or they want to like figure out what it's like a little more, kind of understand what exactly it is they would have to be doing, we invite them to sit on one of our committees. After they spend a year on a committee, maybe two, then they feel more comfortable and they know better themselves whether this is a good fit for the impact that I would like to have. And we as an organization can see, well, you are an excellent committee member, and so like we'd love to have you join the board. And so we've used that as a pipeline for when we don't have spots, but people are interested, or for those who are trying to figure out if this might be a good fit. Perhaps they haven't sat on a board before and they just want to understand what a board looks like and what involvement on a board looks like. Or if we just have too many great people at once and we want to, kind of have a parking lot for them until it's the right time and we can add them to the board.
And I would love to echo that and also share a little bit of what we've been doing, especially the last 2 years, is we don't have and haven't had those opportunities to connect at the wine and cheeses and at the events and the handshaking and all of that. Those are great and important, but some people would argue that they tend to be a little performative, that they tend to be a little less sincere. And so even before the pandemic, I was working on giving the board some tools, again, going back to relationships. And so you talk about people in the pipeline, perhaps our board cycle is June to June, and we may not have anybody rolling off this cycle, but we have people interested. So we are very conscious to, I think I mentioned earlier, make sure that they're given a complimentary membership to Rainbow Families, make sure that they're on our email blasts and all of that. But most importantly is they hear from us. We pick up the phone regularly, not too frequently, but we pick up the phone regularly and just say, oh my gosh, I just wanted to share, we just got this grant and this is what it's going to mean to us. And I knew you'd be excited about it because it's in your wheelhouse and I wanted to share it with you. That's worth its weight in gold. Not so much emails, but definitely the phone calls. It shows earnest effort.
And I would add that engagement and that information sharing is huge, so whether it's, inviting them to sign up for your periodic newsletter, whether it's when you're having a virtual event, inviting them to we have volunteers who are team captains, or team leads when we have virtual fundraisers. It's a way to get involved. They're engaged, they get to know the staff, they get to know their board members, but, they're not officially a board member. So finding those ways to get them looped in and have them familiar with the community and feel like a part of the community, so that when the opportunity comes to officially join the board, they already have that commitment and that connection to the organization.
That's great.
Ultimately, these folks are future major donors for your organization. And so thinking about what stewardship, you all are just talking about that wonderful stewardship model of donors. And so without needing to do that for like 50 people all at once, but like who are your top prospects, and think about how you would steward those relationships like you might a major donor, because ultimately, hopefully one of these people is going to join and be a major donor to your organization.
I know we could easily talk about recruitment this entire time, but I also want to make sure we save a little bit of space for onboarding. We never teach anything about board recruitment without saying that equally important is our onboarding process, right? If we do this great recruitment process, incredible selection, right? We set expectations while we have this amazing board member, and we just kind of let them drop off the face of the earth, right? When they join, all those are not a little bit, right? So it's really important we're thinking about that engagement from the get-go. So I'd love to just hear, we'll ask some more specific questions in a second, but just what does your onboarding process look like right now for your board? What do you recommend there?
I would love to just interject that it is indeed so vital. Anyone who doesn't think so, we need to have a chat. We fell kind of victim to in earlier iterations to the desire to kind of just minimize that, hand them the handbook, email it to them, and they're not going to want to spend 8 hours learning about what it is to be an officer and provide governance and fundraise and learn about our culture and all that. And it failed miserably. So my suggestion is bite the bullet, take the time, invest in these new officers, and it's a sign of respect to them. It's a sign of how much you respect the organization. We make now a big deal of it, and we're really proud of our process and the handbook that we have created. And for a very small nonprofit, we've been told by a handful of our newer onboarded board members that it was the best nonprofit orientation that they've been through. So that's pretty meaningful, and it's something we're proud of.
That sounds great, Darren, and I would echo what you said. Essentially, education, engagement, and then integration. So we, when possible, use a cohort board model. So we have our new board members. There is an on-site, in-person, when allowable and safe, introductory session. There is the board handbook, but it's not just, give you a handbook and run off with it. We're talking through. It's kind of active role-playing, mock sharing, helping people think through what will be, their Calvary story, what is their favorite moment, how do you want to and can you talk with your community about the organization, and then we also fairly early on survey to get to gauge their interest in which committee and how they want to get involved. So you're getting involved with a committee and you have a place in a smaller home within the board almost from day one. And so there, the new board member feels like there's a specific way that they can engage and that they can give back. So it's hopefully a little easier to kind of lose them in the fray as you know, this new person that's still trying to like get their bearings. And then I think we might talk about this more later, but the other thing we do is we connect them with more veteran board members so they have someone that they can rely on, who they know, who they are comfortable with, who they can say, you know, like, hey, like, how did you do X, Y, or Z? Or do you have any, you know, best tips for tackling fundraising my first time? Or, you know, if I want to, you know, volunteer with this program, what might that entail? There's someone that they can go to on a personal level so that they feel that one-on-one personal connection with the board and they don't necessarily feel like an outsider, particularly if you have longer term lengths or if you have renewable terms, so you don't have this clique of, you know, the old crew and the new kid. We want folks to really feel connected and integrated.
Just underscoring that trust is such a big part of board orientation, and start building trust among the collective decision making body, right? I think everybody here experienced in the last few years that there were some tough decisions that boards had to make, right? When we really didn't know what was going on, PPP was not approved, all of these sorts of things. And the boards that had relationships with one another, had trusting relationships, could have conversations that were hard, but that they believed in each other to make good decisions. Those are the organizations that are stronger today. The organizations whose boards do not trust each other and don't know one another don't have the level of engagement and conversation about the guidance and fiduciary responsibilities of being on a board. So love all of these ideas. I do love board buddies. And for those of you that are like, oh, board buddy, like I have a surly board member who would never be a good board buddy. Not everybody has to be a board buddy, and some board members want two buddies, so like that's fine too. So just like connect them to your friendliest, most knowledgeable board members.
Well, and I have three specific and quick onboarding questions, and one of those is around that buddy program. So Serena, maybe you can kick us off, and then other folks can jump in. But yeah, just how to operationalize it. Right, like is this every board member? Do you pick a handful to always go back to? How long does kind of the formal part of the buddy program last? Like, what does that look like, just in case people want to roll that out?
Sure. So I'll start by emphasizing what Carlyn said. Everyone does not have to be a buddy. I think we should be very honest and reflective about our board members, but it can be a great way, like I said, to build that personal connection. So what we do is we try to look at our incoming board members and see if there are any natural connections, overlaps. So for example, my board buddy is also an attorney. She's at the government, not in private practice, but we both have that. We're around the same age. We didn't have an overlapping social circle, but we each came to the organization by connections through friends that were connected. And so there was some kind of natural connection there that we were able to build on. And so that worked really well. And then also thinking about strengths and weaknesses. So we, for example, if there's a board member who has told us in the interview process, I want to try fundraising, but I'm nervous or I'm anxious or I've never done it. We assign them to a board buddy who is really great at fundraising, who loves it, so that they can, you know, rely on them and have that connection there. If someone has expressed a particular skill set that they hope to build out, or that they, you know, want to gain through this experience, perhaps they didn't have an opportunity to develop a particular expertise or skill set in a prior board they were on, we try to pair them with someone who's really good at that. So really matching skills, strengths, opportunities, and trying to find at least some natural connection from the beginning that you can then like walk into the relationship not feeling completely at odds, and hopefully you then organically build on that. And I will say, you know, if the initial pairing doesn't make sense, don't let that discourage you. Don't be afraid of that. That we've had reassignments, and that's okay. And because ultimately you want the buddy program to help the person fully integrate and to find their way into finding their spot and their like unique way to really thrive on the board. And so being nimble with that, I think, can also be helpful. And then timing wise, we say for the first year, we have our members typically stay on for multi-years. You're officially a part of the board buddy program, but that remains unofficially. My board buddy when I joined is a mentor to this day. She's no longer on the board, but she's still someone that I go to before I make any major life decisions. So, you hope that those relationships are organic and they continue out throughout the time you're on the board, and then even once one or both of you have transitioned to alumni status.
I'd love to just add one comment, Serena, especially along the lines of timing and the buddy program, which we do as well. If your schedule of board people coming in and rolling off is really well managed, we typically never have more than 2 people rolling off at a cycle, which is basically Memorial Day weekend. So with a board of 15 people, and maybe 1 or 2 coming in each cycle instead of 4 or 5 or 6, goodness help us, then we're really able to find a really good board buddy match. And we have one of the things that we've done with it is we have let it happen a little bit more organically. So after the orientation, the onboarding, and then their first board meeting, we kind of see who they've connected with in those first kind of 3 sets of contacts, and we've let it happen a little bit more organically. So
I don't have anything to add, Matt. I know you have other questions you want to ask. These are great.
Fair enough. I'll also say as a reminder, it's also helpful for the buddy, right? For like the senior buddy, because I think it's a great engagement thing, especially if board members been there for a while, to remind them about how excited they maybe were initially and stuff. So that can also be an added benefit of that program too. So next one around, and Darren, maybe you can start us off here because you mentioned it, but that handbook, right? A lot of folks spend time on it. Then it's just a dusty digital document that sits on a theoretical shelf, right? Others, haven't started because they feel like it's going to be that. So how do you actually make a handbook that's helpful to folks, and what do you put in it?
Sure. Handbook, when I came on board 4 years ago, was photocopied documents that was in a big box of a file that I got when I came on board. And again, it's about respect, not only for the board members, but for your own organization. So, first order was to really make it look professional and reflect where the organization is at the time. We have done both electronic versions and beautiful, 3-ring binders with tabs and all of that to kind of gauge what has worked best. So the reality is that we have so many files on our computer and on our thumb drives that it often gets a look through and occasionally maybe looked at once in a while. Even though it sometimes was counterintuitive, having a really well done binder with who we are and what we do allows us to modify a page quickly. Again, we're only talking 1, 2, or 3 new board members every season anyway, although I provide them for every board member just as if they would like it or if there are significant changes. To me, it just represents a bit of our professionalism, and it's not 4,000 pages, but I just feel I even see board members who bring the binder with them to board meetings. So that's what we do, and I put a calendar reminder for me every month to go in and look at it and see what changes need to be made, so it isn't just sitting there collecting proverbial dust.
I think all of that makes sense. And one thing that I'll add is that the binder isn't necessarily just for new board members. I know, Darren, you mentioned that you give existing board members a copy if they want it, but we take it a step further. And there are certain pieces of that binder that we have every board member revisit every year at the beginning of the fiscal year. So one is the conflicts of interest form. The one is their commitments. We remind you, when you join, this is what you said that you were going to do. This is what we said we were going to do. And we reaffirm that we're all still on the same page. And then other materials, we also have a give or get, like the board draw on Karen. And so just, resources to help with fundraising and to, help you accomplish what it is that you want to do. And sometimes there are updates to that. So when we moved from a lot of in-person fundraising to virtual fundraising, there were materials on, so now how do I fundraise without an in-person Hope Awards that got reshared with the board. And so we have these kind of staple materials that every year, of course, our new board members get, but every board member is provided so that they can reaffirm and reassess their commitment and have that intentional reminder of this is why I'm here and this is what I'm going to contribute.
One of the things that often gets overlooked in the board manual or the orientation is a primer on nonprofit financial statements. Right. I know everybody's like, oh, what a sexy topic. But it's really important, particularly for board members that are not going to be acquainted with nonprofit financial statements, budgets, balance sheets, cash flow statements, et cetera. And so making sure that your treasurer or executive director or whoever is going to be most familiar with the organization's finances walks through what the things are that's going to be important for your organization. That might be cash on hand, that might be unrestricted net assets. If I'm saying things that you're like, I don't even know what these are, it's really important for your board and part of their fiduciary responsibility to understand what are the metrics and things that are going to be important for them as they're reviewing these financial statements. So I see that's often a missed opportunity. What I like to do is do a mock-up of a past budget with the highlights that say, we're always looking at cash on hand. We're always looking at liabilities. Well, we're looking at net assets, whatever the things might be. And then using that so that they can go back when they have your updated financials and they could say, okay, this is the line item that I'm looking at. This looks good.
I think it's a great thing to highlight as being part of the mandatory onboarding, because a lot of times we see organizations ask board members, hey, if you want this training, let us know. Board members wrongly assume I'm the only one that doesn't understand this, so I don't want to take the training and seem like the kid who doesn't know what's going on, right? But just because your board member was a consultant, works in business, has a business, A, doesn't mean they understand those financial statements, and B, definitely doesn't mean they understand the nonprofit version of it, right? We have weird cash flows, y'all, a lot different than most businesses right there coming over. So making sure that's a great point, Carlyn. Thanks for bringing that up. Last question we have, so feel free, if you all have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to those. So please chat your questions. Last question here, though, and I'll start with you, Carlyn, because you probably see this on a few different boards right now. We had some questions ahead of time around just how are folks keeping their boards feeling connected? A lot of boards still haven't met in person for 2 years now. Maybe they're starting to come back as of late, but still just obviously aren't doing the same level of probably in-person connection. Any advice for helping new board members and also just boards in general still have that kind of social connection?
I also just want to acknowledge, it's not all deficit based, right? For boards that I work with or that I'm on, attendance is actually higher than it ever was before, because you can call in from Maui or Maine and people can be there without the traffic piece, etc. So I am seeing higher engagement in those capacities, but we're missing those chats that one does on the way to the bathroom or whatever, those little special in between moments. And so one of the things that is important, maybe a board chair, a vice chair, think about, it's not all up to the executive director to be some of that connective tissue for the organization. Just the call, the check-in to say, how are you? How are you on a personal level? What's going on in your life? Oh, so-and-so was saying the same thing. Can I connect you? It seems like you guys would have a great conversation about doing XYZ. So making sure to leave space to be intentional. I just talked to an executive director who had said, whenever they're on a walk or a call, they just sort of go through the list of board members and say, I'm going to call Cheryl today and give Cheryl a call. Hey, Cheryl, nothing up. Just taking a walk, checking in, seeing how you're doing, want to give you an update. So just think about, are there some natural stopping points without it being so overwhelming?
I really like that. I will share a few points. One is we use board socials, actual social events, not just we're having a meeting, but we're going to intentionally get together. And for my larger alumni association board, for example, we're going to plan the building that we work out of has a nice rooftop. We're going to have a rooftop event and allow board members to bring a +1, whether it's a roommate or a significant other or a partner, so that there's that personal connection and we want to get to know you outside of just like what you're bringing to our committee. And also we've done some virtual board social events, although those are a little harder. Understanding, varying levels of comfort with in-person events given the pandemic. We've also had opportunities for smaller breakouts. So, having committee members like meet up socially on a smaller level, having like members of the executive committee meet up, like smaller outdoor opportunities to connect virtually, something that we started during the pandemic because we did have a lot of board members who had never have met each other in person, is I started a Since We Last Met. And so it's just like 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of a board meeting where you have an opportunity for folks to share something exciting, new, challenging, whatever the point may be, but we try to keep it positive that's gone on since we last met. So maybe it's, my kid just got into this new program, or I shared my new job that I had started, or, someone shared that they bought a home or they moved. Just having that opportunity to show that we want to know you and care about you beyond the role you're playing on this board. And in the virtual setting, we also use breakout rooms for that. So particularly the first few meetings when we had new board members, I reserved some time at the beginning of the board meeting where we did the Since We Last Met, but in small sessions. And I set up the breakout rooms so that each meeting in new board members were with a different cohort, with a different group of people, so they could have at least 5-10 minutes of that smaller setting time. And so so our board is maybe 18 people right now. So rather than feeling like you're one of 18 little squares on a screen, you're in a smaller room with a handful of people. You can talk about Since We Last Met and get that more personal connection, and you can learn something about someone beyond what might be shared over the course of discussing board business. And then the last thing I'll say is that as board president, I make time or try to make time for regular check-ins with board members. So whether that's, scheduling to spend a few minutes at the end of the board meeting connecting with someone. I'm actually next month going to have lunch with one of our new board members who I've only met once in person, and just to chat and get to know them and sit down and talk, outside of board business. But I think the key here is really just the intentionality and making and protecting time for that one-on-one or small group or as a whole, but personal and not business connection.
Yeah, I think definitely we've seen some folks, even if they only have the capacity to start their meeting like 10 or 15 minutes early, right? Having people hop on so they know it's the social time, the small breakout rooms. I will say transparently, we did that recently. One of our board members was like, I've never been in a breakout room. I was so excited. I was like, we've had different pandemic experiences, but I'm glad that we were able to make that happen for you. So great ideas around. Thank you all for that. I know we're right at time. So I want to thank again our panelists for the great conversation today. Thank you all for joining. If you have other questions we didn't get to, feel free to send them to Laura and myself. We're happy to get some answers back to y'all. And thanks for the great conversation. And hope everyone has a good rest of the day.